The overture of dread, the night air in New Orleans is thick, heavy with the perfume of jasmine and the damp scent of the Mississippi River, a presence both ancient and constant. It is 1918, and the world is weary from war. But here, in the narrow streets of the French Quarter, life pulses with a defiant rhythm. Gas lamps cast long, shimmering shadows that stretch and fold over brick sidewalks and wrought iron balconies, creating an illusion of safety that is about to be shattered. This is the city where secrets linger in the moss-stripped oaks, and where every night has a soundtrack tonight. That soundtrack is beginning to acquire a low, insistent hum of dread. Our journey into the quiet terror begins here, on the edge of the known world, just after midnight. The first sound is the faint, distant echo of a jazz clarinet weaving through the darkness, an upbeat counterpoint to the quiet tragedy unfolding in the home of Joseph and Catherine Mazzio, Italian grocers who kept to themselves. They lived in the neighborhood of Gretna, just across the river, a place where people felt safely removed from the city's vice. On the evening of May 22nd, the only sounds within their small cottage should have been the soft breathing of sleep. But there was another sound, the sickening thud of wood striking bone, followed by a profound, terrible silence. The Axeman did not use a gun. He preferred the intimate, heavy brutality of an axe or a razor, instruments usually reserved for honest work. When Joseph's brother, Jake, who lived next door, arrived the following morning, he found the scene bathed in a horrific, bloody clarity. Catherine was dead, her throat slit so deeply that the cut went down to the bone. Joseph, gravely wounded, but still clinging to life, died moments after the police arrived. The killer had forced entry by chipping away at the back door panel. A silent, meticulous entry that spoke not of panicked violence, but of chilling premeditation. And the murder weapon? It was Joseph Mazzio's own hatchet, found lying in a pool of blood, left behind like a calling card. The only thing missing was the killer himself, vanishing back into the endless, intricate shadows of the city. The terror had begun, announced by the soft, sharp kiss of a borrowed axe. For 6 weeks, New Orleans slept uneasily beneath a sky full of jazz and dread. Summer hung heavy, humid and watchful, as the city held its breath. Each new day brought a rising tide of anxiety, crashing against the city's stout facade until it buckled under the strain. It would break again on June 7th, in the early hours, when the calm of a sleeping city was ripped open by a series of ear-shattering blows. The house of Madame Delphine McCarthy, a respected member of the Creole Society and keeper of a renowned restaurant, was the stage for this horror. Her son, Victor, came upon a scene of carnage so brutal that even the seasoned police officers at the scene recoiled. His mother lay dead, surrounded by a macabre tableau of an oil lamp, a sheet, a broken chair, and a fanal soaked in blood. Once more, the instrument of death was an axe, each stroke precise and merciless. To those who knew Madame McCarthy, the brutality of the crime was as shocking as the choice of weapon. The socialite was a pillar of the community, her restaurant famed for its gumbo and jambalaya. The walls were lined with pictures of her family and friends, many of them prominent figures in New Orleans society. Her killer had not merely taken her life, he had violated the sanctity of her home, defiled her very being, and once more he was gone, melting away into the labyrinthine heart of the city. It was a double blow for the local police force, led by the esteemed chief of detectives, Charles Avard. In addition to solving these murders, they had to navigate the choppy waters of racial politics. The two victims had been white, and the press was clamoring for justice. But the police were stretched thin, and the city was becoming increasingly weary of their empty promises. For the men in blue, the case was a haunting puzzle. Both houses had been locked from the inside, ruling out any possibility of robbery, and there were no witnesses, no sign of a struggle, no motive. The honnêteté, the savage proficiency with which the axe had been wielded. There was nothing amateurish about these killings. The victims had been well selected, attacked in the safety of their own homes, while the killer exhibited not just knowledge of the city, but a kind of perverse intimacy with his weapons. But what could unite these two disparate lives? Joseph Mazzio had been an Italian immigrant, hard-working and unassuming, while Madame McCarthy was a respected Creole. Their social circles, their backgrounds, their professions, All seemed worlds apart, yet somehow they had both been marked for death by the same invisible hand. And then there was the enigma of the axe itself, a blunt instrument rarely used in violent crime, yet now the only tangible link between two heinous murders. It was a far cry from the revolvers and knives favored by most criminals. As the days passed, without an arrest, the fear in the city began to morph into something more sinister, something that clung to the shadows and whispered in the steamy breath of the night. People stopped walking alone after dark, choosing instead to stay indoors, huddling around their radios, listening to music or news. Bars and restaurants emptied early. Laughter turned to nervous chatter, then died off quickly. And the night air, once filled with the sweet sounds of jazz, was now hushed, heavy with foreboding. Even the musicians fell silent, their clarinets and trombones put away, their guitars carefully tuned and locked in their cases. The city, once so vibrant, so alive with music, was now holding its breath, caught in the grip of an unseen terror. As if emerging from the grave, the Axeman struck again. The third victim, Mrs. Elizabeth Williams, was discovered in her home on July. Like the previous victims, she had been taken by surprise, killed in the sanctuary of her own bedroom. Her husband, John, a respected undertaker, had been spared. Though having been out running errands, the killer had shown a chilling preference for female victims and an unnerving boldness. He wasn't afraid to strike in the daylight. Each murder bore the hallmarks of the last, the brutal efficiency, the utter disregard for life. And each time he slipped through the fingers of the law, vanishing into the oppressive heat of the New Orleans night. With each passing day, the Axeman's audacity grew, as did the public's terror. The boundaries of the unknown became narrower, the reach of fear longer. As we approach the climax of our tale, the question echoes through the shadowy streets of New Orleans. Who is the Axeman, and why does he prowl the city's dark corners? What drives him to commit such heinous acts, to instill such fear in the hearts of the innocent? Perhaps the answer lies in the very nature of the beast, an enigma concealed by a mask of brutality, a mystery lost in the haze of bloodshed. Join us next time as we continue the harrowing tale of the Axeman of New Orleans, the jazz age killer, where the hunt for the truth becomes a deadly game and the melody of fear lingers in the air. Until then, may the shadows keep you safe and the darkness hold no terror for your soul. They have long since torn down the house at 1341 Burgundy Street, leveled it with every other building along that block. In fact, if you stood there today, you wouldn't know any of this happened here, wouldn't feel its ghosts beneath your feet. But I can show you where it was, and everything else the Axeman did. And I'll tell you how the people of New Orleans still do you want know who he was, or why he did what he did. This whole area was very much alive. It was just after World War II, and in New Orleans, like many American cities, the war dead had barely been buried before their ghosts began rising up all over the streets, front yards, and balconies. They made themselves known through music, through food, through the joyful parade of second-line dancing. Life in New Orleans was always a celebration, even when death was knocking at your door. In one of those houses stood a family named Maggio Vito and his wife Catherine and their young daughter. Their son Joseph was away fighting in the Pacific, and so they would gather around the radio each night listening to the crackle of static as they strained to hear news of his survival. On the evening of March 11th, 1919, however, the radio was drowned out by the screams of Mrs. Catherine Maggio. Their daughter Josephine had been home for 3 days after receiving word that her brother had been killed in combat. It would seem that the family was overcome with the grief. But soon the neighbors realized something was terribly wrong. No one was answering the door or the telephone, and when they finally got inside, they found a nightmare. Catherine was found lying in the dining room, a ghastly mask of purple and white on her face, surrounded by shards of glass from the chandelier. Her husband Vito was discovered lying on the floor of the kitchen, blood staining the wallpaper crimson. What we've learned since is that both of them had been struck on the head several times, repeatedly, first with a glass paperweight and then with a heavy iron skillet. Their skulls were so badly damaged that the paperweight could not be recovered, so they weren't robbed. That didn't make sense. The money was still there, and aside from that, the house was destroyed. Drawers were torn out, clothes ripped to shreds. They tried to get into the strongbox, but they couldn't break it open. By the time the police arrived, they could find no trace of the killer. And that was only the beginning. In the days after that horrible murder, the police grew suspicious of everyone close to the Maggio family, even their priest, Father Robichaud, whose absence on the night of the murder proved difficult to explain. But still, after 2 weeks of investigation, they had little to show for it. And then came the second murder, that of Bernard Larocque, who was shot in the back while sitting in his friend S car outside a poker club on Bourbon Street. Though the police had found the weapon, a .32 caliber pistol, and witnesses had described the gunman in detail, within a month, the case had gone cold. But 4 months after the killing of Bernard Larocque, on July 12, 1919, the phone rang in the early hours of the morning for the family living at 624 Domain Street. It was the police. They told the family not to leave their house. They were investigating a crime that had happened there, and though the father protested that they hadn't done anything, they knew that wasn't true, because when they got inside, they found the bodies of their children, Paul and Josephine, both bludgeoned to death with a heavy blunt instrument. This was the same address where Vito and Catherine Maggio lived, where their daughter Josephine had moved after her parents died, and the police were starting to think that this, too, was connected. They arrested the family's priest, Father Robert Robichaud, for all 3 deaths, but especially these 2, and held him without bail. With the public outraged and eager for answers, the priest was forced to confess to the killings. He admitted that he had shot Bernard Larocque, and then he surprised everyone when he detailed the entire plan, explaining that he had asked the brothers to meet him at the house on Demerzel Street so that he could kill them and frame the murders as the work of an Axeman. He said he wanted to protect the family from the brutal reality of the world. But when the officers went to retrieve the supposed axe from his home, they found only a meat cleaver, and Father Richard Shaw was never seen again. He escaped from jail in Baton Rouge, wearing only a nightshirt. His body has never been found. Since then, this house has been torn down, but if you stand on the corner of Demoiselles and North Robertson, looking toward the back of the house, you can see the exact spot where Paul and Josephine lost their lives, the place where the priest hid their bodies for 2 days before calling the police. After that, fear took hold of the city. People were convinced that the Axeman was loose again, but it would be almost another year before anyone else was hurt. Part 2. The Silent Witnesses. The city attempted to dismiss the Maggio murders as a domestic dispute or a robbery gone wrong, a common enough occurrence to keep the tourists complacent. But the details whispered in hushed tones told a different, more chilling story. Nothing had been stolen, and the method was too savage, too personal. Just 2 weeks later, the silence of the night was broken again, this time on the night of June 28th. The victim was Louis Besumer, a successful tailor and a suspected spy who ran a small shop and lived in an apartment above it. The attack was nearly identical to the Maggios, the same method of entry through a chiseled-out back-door panel, the same use of a blunt instrument, this time a heavy axe. Louis was struck multiple times, but survived, left bleeding profusely in his bed. Beside him was his mistress, Harriet Lowe, a woman he had claimed was his wife. She was far more critically injured, her head brutally crushed. When the police arrived, they found a bloody, chaotic scene. Louis delirious, whispered confused statements about a dark, tall man attacking them. But what truly solidified the link to the Maggio case was a recovered axe again, the victim's own, left discarded near the body. And yet, this time, a bizarre element was added. A bloody note scrawled on the wall near the bed, which the police initially dismissed as the ramblings of the wounded Besumer. The city was slow to connect the dots, clinging desperately to the illusion that these were isolated incidents. They tried to pin the blame on a petty quarrel, on Louis Besumer himself, even arresting him for a time. But the pattern was undeniable. Italian-American or suspected Italian victims, entry through the back door, and the signature left axe. The Axeman was not merely a killer. He was a phantom moving through the sleeping city with silent, deadly purpose, leaving behind a trail of victims and unanswered questions that stretched the nerves of New Orleans society, taut as piano wire. The beautiful, vibrant rhythm of the city was now underlined by a relentless, ticking fear. Now, while the city was in chaos, the newspaper headlines blared the terrible news, fueled by the sensationalism of yellow journalism. Many believed the stories were exaggerated, a means of selling papers rather than informing the public. Others thought the murders might have been the work of an Italian gang seeking retribution for the Mazzio killings, but those closest to the victims knew better. The terror was real, and after the third murder, they wanted answers. That's when Madame Delphine Lalaurie stepped forward. She was a wealthy Creole socialite, a member of one of the oldest and most respected families in New Orleans. Her parties were legendary, and despite being twice widowed, she remained a prominent figure in the city's social scene. She was also rumored to dabble in voodoo, and now she claimed to know the identity of the Axeman. She told the police and the press that the killer was none other than the man they had arrested and then let go, Louis Pez. According to her, she had been approached by a mysterious man who confessed to the crimes, begging her to intercede on his behalf. He promised to kill again, unless the authorities dropped all charges against him. But when the police searched his apartment, they found no evidence linking him to the murders, and no axe. Soon, rumors abounded that Madame Delphine had lied. Had she made the whole thing up to cover for the real killer? Was she protecting him? Or was she merely trying to protect herself? You see, it turned out she'd had an affair with Mr. Bez, and when his mistress was killed, she was the prime suspect. She vanished from New Orleans, leaving the city to wonder if she'd been involved in the gruesome affair somehow. Of course, the truth is, the wildest theories are often the closest to the facts. What really happened to Madame Delphine? Well, actually, the house she called home is right over here. It's just behind me, hidden by all these trees, and you can tell it's hers because that's where the ghost of voodoo lives. Anyway, what happened next is anyone's guess. Without besumer's confession, the case went nowhere, except perhaps in the realm of superstition. People began blaming the killings on voodoo curses and hoodoo rituals. They whispered that the Axeman was the work of a secret cabal, a conspiracy of dark forces determined to plunge the city into chaos. While some feared the supernatural, others saw a chance to capitalize on the terror. There were those who profited from selling supposed cures to the madness, offering amulets and incantations to ward off the Axeman's wrath. The city became a breeding ground for fear and false hope. But amid the frenzy, there was one constant: the shadow of the Axeman lurking in the corners of every darkened room, haunting the very essence of the city. As time went, when the visits became less frequent, but the threat remained. 4 years afterwards, the sound of an axe rang through the French Quarter, turning every leaf blower into a potential killer and every friendly face into a lurking danger. Then just as suddenly as he started, he stopped. The murders ended. The city exhaled, and the ghosts of the French Quarter danced once more. The summer of 1918 intensified the terror, both in temperature and brutality. The attacks continued with a horrifying consistency that defied police efforts and frayed the nerves of the citizens. It was as if the city was caught in the grip of a macabre metronome. Each tick-tock marked by another life extinguished, another family shattered, and as the humid nights of August deepened, so did the mystery. On the night of August 5th, a young woman named Anna Lohman was asleep in her cottage with her husband. They were nestled in the embrace of their home, unaware that the specter of death was drawing near. It was around 2 o'clock in the morning, the witching hour when the veil between the world of the living and the dead is at its thinnest. Suddenly, the silence of the night was violated by a sound so mundane, so ordinary that it could have been mistaken for just another passing visitor. Someone began to chip away at the paneling of their front door. But this was no ordinary visitor. It was the Axeman paying his respects. For a few moments, the only sound was the rhythmic tap, 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 as the door yielded slowly to his patient assault. Then as suddenly as he began, he stopped. A moment of silence hung in the air, pregnant with anticipation. Then the door gave way, and the Axeman slipped inside. In the dim glow of a lamp, Anna saw a tall, shadowy figure standing in the doorway. Before she could scream, before her mind could comprehend what was happening, the Axeman struck. With a swiftness that belied his size, he raised his axe high and brought it down on her. Anna crumpled to the floor, blood blossoming on her white nightgown. Her husband, who had been awakened by the commotion, stumbled out of bed to find a horrific tableau. The Axeman, with an expressionless face, was bringing his bloodied axe down on him again and again. As the light of dawn painted the sky with hues of rose and gold, the Axeman ceased his bloody work. The two victims lay sprawled on the floor, Their lives ebbed out onto the wooden boards of their home. Miraculously, Anna survived, though her body bore the mark of 6 savage blows from the axe. Her husband, however, was found in a daze, barely able to speak, his senses dulled by pain and shock. When the police arrived, he could offer them no description of the attacker. All he could muster was the vague impression of a shape, a shadow that moved too quickly in the darkness. As word of the brutal double-axing spread through the city, fear took on a new urgency. The Axeman was not just killing people. He was hunting them down in their own homes, turning sanctuary into a slaughterhouse. To many, the image of the strong and sturdy door, violated and broken like a bird's nest, symbolized the collapse of their security. The very idea of a home, once synonymous with love and safety, was now tainted with the specter of violence. What was a home if it couldn't protect its inhabitants? If even the stoutest barrier could be breached by a madman with an axe, then where was one to find solace? The jazz soundtrack to Terror played on. Fear became the bass note that underpinned the melodies of the French Quarter. But the Axeman was not finished. He had a grim symphony to complete. Weeks passed, and with each day, the tension in New Orleans thickened like the humidity. The sun beat down on the city, but the warmth couldn't penetrate the chill that had settled in people's hearts. Then, in the early hours of September, the nightmare reached. Another young woman, Señora Schneider, was at home when the Axeman came calling. Her house was different from Anna's. Not a grand mansion, but a modest dwelling befitting a working girl. But to the Axeman, all homes looked the same after a while, all doors promising the same primal fear. He entered as silently as before, a wraith in the night, and confronted his victim. Unlike Anna, Mrs. Schneider never saw the attack coming. The first blow of the axe connected with her skull, sending a spray of blood and bone fragments across the room. Then came more blows, vicious and unrelenting, until she lay on the floor, her life leaking out of her and the unborn child she carried within her. The Axeman did not pause to admire his handiwork. He did not linger in the house or rummage through drawers, as some killers do, seeking not just to murder, but to desecrate. No, he was here on business, grim and swift. He left as silently as he came, taking with him the secrets of his madness. By now, the police were beside themselves with frustration. The case had gone from a local nightmare to a citywide panic. The newspapers, ever eager for sensation, ran daily stories on the Axeman's exploits, each one adding a new layer to the enigma. Was he a foreigner? Was he targeting Italians? Was he just a random maniac driven by a consuming, internal darkness? The truth was, the Axeman had become a composite of all these things, and none. He was the fear itself, the monster under the bed, the boogeyman come to life. He was what happened when the bright lights of jazz and the murky depths of human depravity intertwined. In the taverns of the French Quarter, people whispered of a Haitian zombie killer, of voodoo magic and curses. Others spoke of a deranged veteran from the recent World War, of a man driven to madness by the horrors he had seen. Theories abounded, but none could explain the motive, the method, the madness. Some blamed the war, others blamed society, but in truth, they were all blaming shadows. The Axeman was not a product of his environment. He was a perversion of it, an inversion of the carefree, musical spirit of New Orleans. And still, he walked among them, a specter haunting the balconies and courtyards, blending into the crowds of tourists and locals alike. The police were forced to the grim conclusion that New Orleans was no longer safe. Even during the day, the vibrant streets seemed to hold their breath, waiting for the inevitable sound of splintering wood that would herald the Axeman's return. People began sleeping with loaded guns and axes beside their beds, ironically turning the murder weapon into their only defense. They lived in fear of the night, of the darkness that brought with it not just the possibility of rain, but the certainty of terror. It was as if the Axeman had put the entire city on trial, finding them guilty of being alive, of existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. Each day, he chose a victim at random, making an example of their vulnerability, a warning to the rest. The musicians of New Orleans had a new song to play, a dirge for the fallen and a lament for the living. Their trumpets wailed like lost souls. Their trombones growled like predators. and their drums thumped a relentless tattoo that echoed the pounding heart of fear. The music was no longer just for entertainment. It was a shared experience, a collective cry in the wilderness, a desperate attempt to exorcise the demons that stalked the city. But the Axeman cared little for their music, their fear, or their defiance. He was beyond reason, beyond remorse. He was a force of nature, a hurricane of hate, and he would continue his reign of terror until he had stripped New Orleans of its innocence, its joy, its very soul. And so the jazz soundtrack to terror played on, a requiem for a dying city, a lullaby for its nightmares, for in New Orleans, the night was always pregnant with danger, and the melody of fear was the only melody that truly played on. The Axeman had not only murdered his victims, he had murdered the city's peace of mind, turning the vibrant, musical soul of New Orleans into a silent, trembling watcher. The question wasn't when he would strike next, but where. Because in the labyrinth of the French Quarter, every doorway was a potential trap, every shadow a lurking dread, and every night was a step closer to the abyss. We now return to the continuing saga of the Axeman of New Orleans. On March 13th, 1919, a chilling letter appeared in the New Orleans State's newspaper, and, to quote the esteemed critic, Mignon Fogarty, who is also known as the grammarist on the internet, this letter was garishly written in florid, self-aggrandizing prose. And here we pause to acknowledge our own mortality. Let us consider that each day is a precious gift, and that life is fleeting. Before we continue, please like and subscribe to show support for our work. Now let us plunge into the heart of this terrifying tale. The letter reads in partels. March 13th, 1919. Esteemed mortal of New Orleans. Greetings. I am not a human being, but a spirit and a demon from the hottest hell. You mortals have never experienced a terror such as I will inflict upon you. How police and other mortals have failed to capture me is a mystery. I am death, and the Grim Reaper has claimed many souls during my short earthly visit. The police will never capture me, for I am not flesh and blood but pure cinders. I am the spirit of the fire. I am the Axeman. The author of the letter then goes on to threaten the good people of New Orleans, saying that come Tuesday, March 19th, at the stroke of 12:15 a.m., he will return and take more lives. But here is where things get truly eerie. The letter contains a curious condition for sparing the city. The writer says, in part, if everyone has a jazz band going, why then so much the better for the people? One thing is certain, and that is that some of your people who do not heed this warning will get the axe. At about this time, the city had two choices. No. 1. They could ignore the letter and hope for the best. Or number 2. They could try to bargain with the killer. The city decided to do both. The police commissioner, Charles Beck, said publicly that he scoffed at the idea of negotiating with a murderer. At the same time, he went ahead and ordered extra police on the street for the night of March. Meanwhile, word of the Axeman's letters spread through the city like wildfire. People were understandably terrified, but they were also entranced by the sheer audacity of the communication. After all, it was one thing to read about a mysterious killer stalking the city. It was quite another to receive a letter from him or her, or them. Was the Axeman merely trying to terrify the populace? Was he boasting? Was there some dark purpose behind the missive? As the hours ticked by, the streets grew quieter. Musicians put down their instruments, couples left dance halls, and families stayed indoors, away from windows, listening intently to the silence. In the eerie quiet, the ticking of clocks seemed amplified, counting down the minutes until midnight. Then came the distant sound of an axe, followed by screams. But as dawn broke, it became clear that the Axeman had not struck again that night. The letter had worked. The city had heeded the warning and survived. For many, it was a relief, but for others, it was a disappointment. They had hoped for jazz, not fear. Music filled the streets. Bands played in every house that had won. Some establishments even hired musicians just for the night to protect them. The police walked the streets with clubs, ready to defend any establishment that might be targeted by the act. Mayor Martin Behrman joined the throngs of policemen and was seen parading around the French Quarter with a Tommy gun. All through the night, people played music, sang, and danced, convinced that they were outsmarting the killer. But when the sun rose, The revelers were gone. The Axeman had struck again. The victims were found lying in their beds, their heads smashed in by an axe. The Axeman had delivered on his promise. 5 bodies were discovered that morning, all brutally murdered in their sleep. The killer had not been deterred by the city's all-night jazz festival. The news spread quickly and panic ensued. People wondered if the Axeman had been playing them, if the whole jazz gambit had been a ruse. Some blamed themselves for surviving while their neighbors had perished. Others vowed revenge. In response to the murders, the police increased their patrols and set up roadblocks throughout the city. But the Axeman was nowhere to be found. As the investigation continued, rumors spread like wildfire. Some whispered that the Axeman was a member of a secret society bent on destroying New Orleans. Others claimed that the killer was a Haitian zombie, brought to life by voodoo magic. Still, others believed that the Axeman was not a person at all, but a ghost or a demon. Amid the chaos, a new voice emerged. A man named John Perry, a local undertaker, who had handled several of the Axeman's victims. Perry claimed that the killer was none other than a former employee of his, a disgruntled man named Lowe, who had been fired for stealing. Perry said that Lowe had threatened to kill him and his family, and he believed that Lowe was responsible for the recent murders. The police listened intently, but they were unable to find any evidence to support Perry's claims. Lowe was questioned, but he denied any involvement in the killings. Frustrated, the police released Lowe, and the search continued. As the weeks passed, the Axeman's shadow loomed larger over New Orleans. People lived in fear of the next attack, wondering if they would survive the night. The murders continued unabated, and the city's morale plummeted. Then, on April 11th, 1919, another letter appeared in the newspapers. This one even more chilling than the last. The letter, postmarked from Hot Springs, Arkansas, was signed simply, The Axeman, and it began with a mocking greeting to the frightened residents of New Orleans. "How's everybody since I've been gone? How's business?" The Axeman boasted about his travels, claiming that he had visited Chicago, where he had met Al Capone and shot a policeman. He also bragged about his exploits in other cities, including Cincinnati, where he said he had killed 7 men and 2 women. "I could have done more," he wrote, "but it was getting too hot for me, so I quit." He then returned to New Orleans, reminding the citizens that he was still their biggest problem. "You have lots of nice cool days coming," he said ominously, "and you won't be able to hide behind your bars and doors." The letter ended with a final threat. "I am after the money, the fast money. I am after the girls and the booze, and I will get it all." Signed, The Axeman. Once again, the killer had taunted the city, but this time he had revealed his motive. The Axeman wanted money, women and alcohol, and he was willing to kill anyone who stood in his way. New Orleans is a city that practically oozes atmosphere. Walking through the French Quarter, you can almost taste the history in the air. The ghosts of vampires and voodoo priestesses lingering around every wrought iron balcony. It is also the birthplace of jazz, and a place where music spills out of every doorway like the city's lifeblood. So imagine this scene. The year is 1919. You're re-strolling through the French Quarter late one night, when suddenly you hear the unmistakable sound of a saxophone. It's coming from an open window, and the tune is so haunting, so mournful that you stop in your tracks. You lean against the wall below the window and close your eyes, letting the music wash over you. Suddenly, a sharp, metallic temp fills the air, and a figure drops silently from the second-story window onto the sidewalk below. He melts into the shadows and disappears. For a moment, you think nothing of it. Another night in the Big Easy. Then you glance up at the window again and see a body slumped over the piano, a single red stain blooming on his white shirt. This actually happened in 1918, though we don't know exactly which night, and it was the beginning of a horrifying string of murders that would leave the city of New Orleans paralyzed in fear. A serial killer was stalking the city, targeting musicians. In the span of a few months, 6 musicians would be found dead, each killed by a single, clean slice across the chest. And the police didn't have a single lead. So, here's everything you need to know about the strange case of the Axeman of New Orleans. Our story begins in New Orleans East, in the small town of Buraz, Louisiana, where a young Creole musician named Buddy Bolden had just shot Lincoln Taylor. Taylor, a prominent member of the local White Guard, had insulted Bolden's friend, So Bolden took him out behind the house and shot him twice in cold blood. After killing Taylor, Bolden fled to New Orleans and slipped into the bustling city's underbelly. For a while, he lived large, staying at expensive hotels, buying fast cars, gambling and smoking cigars. Some say he earned his money honestly, playing music with his band, while others claim he got it from dealing in contraband liquor, stolen goods and narcotics. What we do know is that Bolden was rarely seen without a gun in his hand, and he was unafraid to use it. In October 1906, he wounded a bartender after a fight over a card game. 2 years later, he went on a shooting spree at a party, wounding 5 people before finally handing himself over to the police. He served just 9 months of his sentence and returned to New Orleans in 1911. While Bolden might have been able to escape justice, he couldn't hide from his demons, and his old habits quickly caught up with him. On September 14th, 1917, after an altercation with some fellow musicians, Bolden pulled out his pistol and shot them all, then set fire to the building they were in. When the police arrived, they found 3 men dead, 2 women dead, 1 woman badly wounded, and 1 man missing. The wounded woman identified Bolden as the shooter, but he had vanished. Instead of searching for him, the police arrested the surviving men, charging them with illegal possession of firearms. This bizarre turn of events would become a familiar refrain throughout the city's gruesome history. When the police failed to protect its citizens from the vicious attacks of the act, they would often turn to arresting innocent musicians, seemingly in hopes that someone else would take responsibility for stopping the killer. But that wasn't going to happen. While Bolden was wanted for the mass shooting, he carried on with his life as usual, even releasing an album called Bolden's Back. Then early on the morning of March 3rd, 1918, he was found lying dead in the middle of the street, a single deep gash across his chest, almost as if he'd been sliced open with an axe. The police suspected foul play, but again, no arrests were made. Now, we don't know for sure who killed Buddy Bolden, but it seems likely that the culprit was an axe-wielding serial killer who would come to be known as the Axeman of New Orleans. Our next victim was Michael Robitaille, who was found murdered in his apartment on July 10th. 1918, then, on August 12, 1918. Anthony Lecoucure was discovered hacked to death in his home. Both men were well-known Creole musicians, and both had been killed in almost the exact same way. Despite the similarities, the police refused to connect the cases, instead insisting that they were just copycats. The first real clue came on October 13, 1918, when a touring musician named Andrew Dalton was found dead in his hotel room, another name on the killer's hit list. This time, the police took notice. They combed through the recent arrivals and departures at the hotel, hoping to find a suspect, but their investigation turned up nothing. On November, another musician, George Bartholomew, was found slain in his home. 5 murders, 4 months, 0 suspects. As the killer continued to elude the police, fear gripped the city. Residents barricaded themselves indoors after dark, convinced that the Axeman was hunting new victims. Music halls and dance halls closed, cutting off the city's lifeblood. Newspapers ran stories describing the gruesome scenes, and even the mayor got in on the action, offering a $2,000 reward for information leading to the killer's capture. The Axeman seemed to revel in the panic he had caused, leaving behind mocking calling cards for the police, sometimes even making direct threats. One note read, "You may go on now and look for my other victims. I'm only keeping 6 of them now, and will kill more as fast as I can find them." Another said, "If you want to find me, come down to the riverfront and look for me between 12 and 1 o'clock any night. I am a tall, slender man with a black mustache, wearing a black hat, a black shirt, and a black tie." Clearly, whoever the Axeman was, he wanted to be caught. And then on January 12, 1919, he gave the police their biggest clue yet. In a letter to the editor of the New Orleans States, he wrote, "I want to tell you what I am going to do tomorrow night. I am going to kill 12 more musicians, and it will be my last big spree. If you want to see me kill 12 musicians, go to any place where they are playing and you will see something you have never seen before. I have done my work in this city, and tomorrow I am going to do my last. My work is to kill musicians, and I will never stop until every musician has left the city. All the musicians who leave the city will be safe from me. I have no grudge against those who leave before my rounds get there. Those that stay will be killed. If you see me, do not scream or make any noise, for I am a musician and will show you some jazz before I go to heaven. If you really want to stop me, Put all the church bells in New Orleans and in the whole state of Louisiana in your hands, and ring them all night from now until I finish my spree. In other words, the Axeman planned to kill 12 more musicians on Tuesday, March 19th. And if the police wanted to stop him, they knew exactly where to look. As the letter made the rounds, fear turned to frenzy. Musicians dropped everything and fled New Orleans, many barely making it out alive. Overnight, the Axeman had turned the entire city against its musicians, blurring the line between good and evil, victim and perpetrator. With most of the musicians gone, the city was defenseless. But that wasn't going to stop them from trying. Tuesday, March 19th, 1919, dawned under an atmosphere of electric tension. The city was preparing for a unique kind of salvation. The Axeman had thrown down his gauntlet, and New Orleans, the birthplace of jazz, was ready to accept the challenge. All day long, instrument sales soared. Pianos were dusted off, saxophones were retrieved from pawn shops, and makeshift bands formed on every street corner. People who had never played an instrument in their lives were determined to make noise. That evening, as the clock ticked toward 12:15 a.m., the city began to roar. Every dance hall, bar, cafe, and speakeasy was packed, overflowing with people dancing as if their lives depended on it, and perhaps they did. Radios, a relative novelty, were tuned to the highest volume. But the real spectacle was in the residential neighborhoods. People who didn't own instruments played phonographs at maximum volume, or simply gathered friends and family to sing, bang pots and pans, and stomp their feet. The air was thick with the beautiful, chaotic sound of spontaneous music, a wall of noise rising from the streets and rooftops. It was a cacophony of fear, defiance, and pure, joyful New Orleans spirit. At the appointed hour, las 12:15 de la mañana, the entire city was one giant, pulsing concert. The volume was deafening, a brassy, rhythmic shield against the silent menace. The result was astonishing. Tuesday night, March 19th, passed without incident. Not a single person was harmed. Not a single door was breached. Whether the Axeman was an actual man who truly loved jazz, or a demon satisfied by the city's terrified compliance, he kept his promise. The music had saved New Orleans. The event became a legendary moment of collective defiance, a night when the soul of the city fought back against the darkness, not with weapons, but with rhythm and melody. However, the relief was only temporary. The Axeman might have been amused by the music, but he was not gone. The next attack came just a few months later, proving that the killer was only on a brief, musical sabbatical, waiting for the jazz to fade and the silence to return. I want to take you back to that fateful night in July. The air is thick with humidity and anticipation. Musicians are tuning their instruments in the French Quarter and on St. Peter's Street. The crowd at the New Orleans Lafite is gathered, ready for what will become one of the most famous nights in jazz history. It's hot, it's smoky, and the music is hot and smoky, a night that will be talked about for generations. But right now, nobody knows it. This is New Orleans on July 12th, 1919. And in a few hours, it will become the night the music died. For a few hours, it seems like New Orleans has been spared. The Axeman isn't here tonight. Then around midnight, over in the residential Treem neighborhood, George and Marie King hear screams in the street, followed by the sound of an axe biting into wood. As they look out the window, they see a brutal scene unfold. A young woman, Helen Nelson, lies bleeding on the ground before a house on the corner of North Robertson and Galvez Streets. Her attacker stands over her, an axe raised high, then brought down again and again. The neighbors scream and shout from their windows, but the killer pays them no heed. When he's done, he calmly walks away, leaving Helen's body in a pool of blood. This is the 4th time in 2 months that the Axeman has struck, and the first time anyone has actually seen him. Panic grips the city. People talk of a madman on the loose, an axe-wielding monster preying on young women. The police are baffled. The witnesses' descriptions of the killer are vague at best, and there are no obvious connections between the victims. Over the next few weeks, the attacks continue, each one deepening the mystery. On July, Josefa and Mary Sanchez awake to find an intruder in their home. Their daughter Catherine lies dead on the floor, her throat cut open. On August, Willie and Maggie Jackson also find their daughter murdered in their home, and in early September, the Axeman claims another victim, George DeLome, who is found dead in his barber shop. With each new attack, the killer seems to be moving further and further from the original victims, and with each attack, the public's fear grows. Then, just as abruptly as he began, the Axeman stops. For 3 months, there are no more attacks, no more killings in the French Quarter. Upton are down, and just as suddenly, New Orleans begins to breathe a little easier. But beneath the surface, the dread remains. Everyone wonders when the Axeman will return. In the uneasy lull, whispers spread through the city like the scent of jasmine in the humid air. People talk in hushed voices of strange occurrences, fleeting glimpses of dark figures, and stories of the killer seen, fleeing from the scene of his latest crime. There's talk of a secret cult, of satanic rituals, and of a killer untouched by God, man, or law. But the biggest question of all is, who is the Axeman? And why is he doing what he's doing? The reality is that despite all the theories, nobody really knows. We do want to know why he chose his victims, or why he stopped attacking after nearly killing his wife. We don't know if he acted alone or if he had accomplices, and we don't know what drove him to terrorize the city for those few terrible months in 1919. All we know is what happened in broad daylight on July, when a beautiful night of jazz ended in screams and the glint of an axe in the gaslight. In the end, the case went cold, and the Axeman faded into a kind of local lore. Today, you can still visit the French Quarter and walk the very streets where he stalked his victims. You can almost hear the echoes of their screams and the distant strains of that fateful night when the music died. And every now and then, when the wind blows just right, you might catch a whiff of honeysuckle and old blood. There are some cases that stick with us long after we've put down our instruments and left the stage. Those haunting melodies, they echo in our minds long after the final chord. One such tune is the gruesome rhythm of the Axeman of New Orleans. In the heart of New Orleans, where jazz once offered a vibrant counterpoint to life's harsh realities, a sinister melody began to weave its way through the city's vibrant fabric. A melody played on the strings of fear. The story begins in 1918, when the city was still waltzing through the throes of World War I. People were dancing to the infectious beat of jazz, unaware that a shadow lurked at the edge of their merriment. The first notes of the Axeman's notoriety sounded in the small hours of March 6, 1918. In the bedroom of Mrs. Delphine McCarthy, an elderly woman lived on the corner of Annunciation and 14th Streets. The city was awakened to the brutal rhythm of an axe. At first, the neighbors thought it was just another instance of domestic violence, commonplace in those days. But then the sound of shattering glass, followed by screams, sliced through the night. When help arrived, they found Mrs. McCarthy's lifeless body lying amidst splintered wood and blood. Her skull was dented like a discarded instrument, forever silenced. The Axeman struck again, each blow of his axe carving a new notch of fear into the hearts of New Orleans. On July 8, 1918, he claimed another victim, Mademoiselle Marie, whose headless torso was discovered in the St. Roch neighborhood. Then, on November 23, 1918, Joseph Pierre, a resident of Desire Street, met his end, his house echoing with the sounds of the approaching doom. With each strike, the Axeman's boldness grew, sending shockwaves through the city. As 1919 dawned, so did a new wave of terror. In January, the body of Philip McAllister was found mutilated near the old Charity Hospital on Canal Street, and a month later, it was John Burke's turn. The police were baffled, the citizens terrified, and the Axeman seemed unstoppable. The newspapers dubbed him the Axeman of New Orleans, and his face became a phantom visage haunting the city's dreams. The Axeman would eventually claim 7 lives in total, and the chaos reached a fever pitch on October 27, 1919, when the fearsome Axeman struck twice in one night. Mike Pepitone met his end, and the city was shaken to its core. But as the clock struck midnight on December 10, 1920, over a year after the last Axeman murder, a woman named Mrs. Esther Albano, the widow of Mike Pepitone, entered a house in Los Angeles and shot and killed a man named Joseph Mom. She was later quoted as saying, "I told him he was a vile, dirty murderer, and that he had killed my husband. He tried to make a grab for the gun, but I shot him before he could touch me." Mrs. Albano, armed with vengeance and grief, ended the life of Joseph Momfer, a man linked to the infamous Axeman. In that moment, the music seemed to stop. Even the bustling streets of Los Angeles held their breath, as if in reverence to the drama about to unfold. Who was Joseph Mumfre? How did he become the central note in the Axeman's somber symphony? Born in New Orleans in 1889, Mumfre's early life was shrouded in the same kind of mystery that clung to the Axeman himself. His story was one marked by hardship and brushes with the law. By the time he was 19, Mumfre was already a suspect in a series of crimes, having been questioned in connection with a stolen Ford. In 1913, he found himself in trouble again, accused of assaulting a woman. These incidents cast a shadow over his life, hinting at a darkness that would eventually come to define him. His path led him to Texas, where he married Mary Fosco, a young woman from New Orleans. In 1917, Mumfre returned to New Orleans. His wife soon followed, bringing with her a tragic tale. She alleged that she had been raped by a man named Joe Clark, who she claimed resembled the actor. Then came the fateful night of October 12, 1919. The Axeman claimed yet another victim, Madame Osei, and now the widow of Mike Pepitone enters the narrative. Mrs. Albano believed that Mumfre was the elusive Axeman, driven by a grief that knew no bounds. She confronted him and fired 3 shots. The last one proved fatal. When the police arrived, they found a scene straight out of a macabre play. The body lay sprawled on the floor, a testament to the ferocity of the encounter. Mumfre was rushed to the hospital, where he fought for his life. During a struggle, he mumbled something about New Orleans, hinting at a connection to the city's most notorious killer, but he never fully revealed his story before slipping into unconsciousness. He died 4 days later. The police, desperate to solve the Axeman mystery, latched on to this new lead. Was this dying man the phantom they had been chasing for so long? And did he hold the key to understanding the horrifying motive behind the brutal killings? Unfortunately, the answer slipped away with Mumfre's last breath. His subsequent death led to conflicting accounts of what actually transpired. Did Joseph Mumfre really confess to being the Axeman? Or did the desperate widow orchestrate a false narrative in her quest for revenge? The silence of the grave leaves us with more questions than answers. As the investigation deepened, the noose of suspicion tightened around Mumfre's neck. His life in New Orleans coincided with the Axeman's reign of terror, and his alleged confession, though cryptic, pointed directly at him. Could this really be the end of the Axeman's tale? Had they finally cornered the beast? Yet as the days turned into weeks, the mystery only deepened. Eyewitnesses came forward, casting doubt on Mumfre's guilt. They painted a picture of a man who, though rough around the edges, was far from the monstrous Axeman. The final blow came when forensic analysis of the murder weapon failed to link Mumfre to the crime scenes. The physical evidence crumbled, leaving behind a residue of uncertainty. Suddenly, Mumfre's story took a bizarre twist. In an unexpected turn of events, witnesses recalled seeing Mumfre at a boxing match in Los Angeles, on the very night of the murder he was accused of. This revelation shattered the timeline of the crime, placing Mumfre miles away from the murder scene. With a crucial piece of evidence against him disintegrating, the walls of suspicion began to crumble. The police were back at square one, the widow's quest for revenge left unresolved. So who was Joseph Mumfre? An accomplice, a mere witness, or an innocent man caught in the crossfire of a madman's game? The truth seems to have been lost in the shuffle of time. Was the Axeman a single individual, or a sinister chorus of killers? Some believe that the killer was actually a group of people who shared the moniker Axeman, acting independently and sometimes together. This theory finds support in the inconsistencies in the victims' descriptions of the killer's appearance. Additionally, certain aspects of the killings seem to indicate multiple perpetrators. For example, the number of victims found in one night suggests that there may have been more than one Axeman at work. Furter more. The killer's uncanny ability to evade the police could be explained by a network of accomplices, providing him with information and aiding his escape. Other theories point towards a single perpetrator. One compelling hypothesis suggests that the Axeman was a traumatized veteran returning from World War I. The brutality of war could have left him mentally scarred, leading to horrific acts of violence upon his return home. Another theory attributes the killings to a deranged musician, possibly a fellow jazz musician, driven to madness by the competitive and cutthroat nature of the music industry. This chilling idea suggests that the very city that nurtured jazz was also its undoing. Some believe that the Axeman was a manifestation of New Orleans' darker impulses, a city grappling with deep social and economic issues. The killings became a way to channel the frustrations and anxieties of a community pushed to the brink. However, the most intriguing theory attributes all the murders to a single killer. This view holds that the Axeman was not a figment of the collective imagination, but a tangible, albeit shadowy figure who stalked the streets of New Orleans. This theory paints a grim portrait of a city under siege, trapped in the clutches of a relentless killer. As the final note faded into the silence of the night, the legend of the Axeman continued to resonate. The mystery continues to captivate, reminding us that even in the vibrant tapestry of jazz, there can be dissonant chords of violence and despair. Whether the Axeman was a single tormented soul or a chorus of shadows, his deeds remain a haunting melody in the annals of crime. The case of the Axeman is a chilling reminder that even in the face of unspeakable evil, hope can endure. Just as the musicians of New Orleans kept playing despite the lurking danger, we too must keep searching for the light of truth in the darkest corners of our world. So who do you think was the Axeman of New Orleans? Do you think it was Joseph Mumford or someone else entirely? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for listening. Until next time, remember, the music never stopped.